With me now, Antoine Seawright, Democratic strategist and founder of Blueprint Strategies, along with Republican strategist Susan Del Percio and former Republican Congressman David Jolly, both of whom are MSNBC political analysts. Welcome, guys. Antoine, you first here. Where does Harris need to focus the most, and how can she keep this momentum going after the convention?
Well, the Kamala momentum the world is experiencing is certainly real. And so I think the next step is to continue to intervene with the American people. That's top priority, but also harnessing that energy with laser focus and precision. We know that this game we're in called politics is a game of addition and multiplication, not subtraction or division. So she cannot afford to leave no constituency untouched. And so her efforts to go to Battleground Georgia, where they have some 400,000 volunteers, 24 offices, and I think 177 staffers on the ground is going to be so important. Her efforts of a high-tech and a high-touch campaign are going to be critical. And quite frankly, this is going to be a race that's won on the margins, and I'm confident in our ground game, but I'm also confident in our candidate quality and the versatility that Kamala Harris brings to the race.
Okay. Kamala momentum, by the way. I heard that. Duly noted. All right. So, Susan, former President Trump campaigning in Detroit tomorrow, focusing on Michigan, in fact, this week. A New York Times poll prior to the convention had Harris up 4 points in that state, but within the margin of error. How will Trump try to cut into her lead?
By spreading more lies and falsehoods. I don't think at this point that Trump is going to cities like Detroit to actually win over votes, but rather to kind of plant the seed of a false claim of a fixed election. That's what I think this is about. He knows what's he going to do in Detroit? He's going maybe for the media market, but he keeps saying he has, a high number of supports among Black men. It's not there anymore. So what Trump has to do is, if he goes to places like Detroit, he has to really stay on message because it's a national message.
Interesting. David, Harris said her first national interview as the nominee is going to take place by the end of August, so that means sometime this week. How critical will that be after a few press interactions since becoming the nominee?
It's critically important because it will either keep the momentum going or possibly briefly interrupt it. But it's a very important moment for the country, Republicans and Democrats alike, to see Vice President Harris engaged in a one-on-one interview with a sober, serious reporter with real questions. And in some ways, I think it's more about how she answers the question than what she actually says, if that makes sense. Look, she should get pressed on, are there changes from when she ran in 2019 as a presidential candidate to now? And if so, why? She'll get pressed on her role when it comes to the Biden-Harris administration on the border. Maybe she'll get questions also pressed on foreign policy and Afghanistan withdrawal. So there will likely be some kind of uncomfortable moments for the vice president. And that's where it's important that we get to see how she handles those moments. The Trump camp is already running a commercial about a quip she delivered when she was pressed on having not visited the border in the past. Do we see that, Vice President Harris, or do we see the strength of the candidate we've seen in the last 4 weeks? It's not going to be a make or break interview. Her candidacy is that strong right now. But it is very important that we see how she handles a strong push from a seasoned, sober reporter.
Well, it sounds to me like you're saying it could help make it rather than break it. You don't think it's a make or break thing. But what Susan, do you want to say?
I'm sorry. I just want to add, it's not a one-on-one interview. And that's the problem, I think, with the way they set it up. It's Harris and Walz together with an interviewer. And that, I think, was a strategic mistake. They should have put her out there on her own to show her strength and do everything David just said. I think it's a mistake doing it together.
Okay. Well, go ahead.
Well, I disagree a bit. I think the most important interview she can do is continuing interviewing with the American people, because people understand the contrast in this election. I think that is going to determine who passes or fails in November. The most important thing Kamala Harris and Governor Walz must do is continue to speak directly to the American people with bread and butter, barbershop and beauty salon issues, kitchen table issues, because that is what's going to drive the narrative as well as drive turnout. So getting caught up in this idea that these interviews are a must, not a plus, I think that's a false narrative. At the end of the day, a lot of people may tune in, but a lot may not. And so her going directly to the people, meeting them where they are with issues about how their future is going to be shaped is the most important thing we must do as Democrats. And we can't allow the media to drive a narrative about what's important in this race.
What about, Antoine, the energy, the fundraising that we've seen since Harris became the nominee? I mean, it has been outstanding. And now supporters are asking, actually, if Harris could be, quote, not only a candidate for president, but actually, and rather remarkably, the leader of a political movement. Is this the start of a movement? And if so, what kind?
Well, I think it's a movement we've never seen before. And quite frankly, I think she's a once-in-a-generation candidate, and we're starting to experience that in many ways. I've said publicly she's brought more energy to this race than Duke Power Company itself. But that energy has to be harnessed and has to be used with, I think, with purpose in order to drive out every single constituency we need. She's starting to bring the politically unhoused home. She's giving the politically homeless a reason to come home, and she's uniting the party. But we still have work to do in terms of getting our base together and then the outreach to independent thinkers and independent voters.
You know, Susan, can I ask you, since you're a veteran of many campaigns, the issue of timing. Look at how Antoine is responding to the question and the headlines about her starting a movement, how she's a once-in-a-generation candidate. She ran back in 2019 for the 2020 election. And there's a difference. So the timing of this, she was not perceived as the leader of a movement 5 years ago. How much difference does timing make with any candidate?
It's all about timing, Alex, 100%. And, you know, to the vice president's credit, I hope she's learned a lot during her 3.5 years as vice president. She's bringing a lot more to the table today than she could even in 2019. But as far as being a movement, I think what's interesting about Antoine's answer is he talked about needing to reach out and get every vote on the ground. A candidate should not head a movement at the same time they are running. She needs to focus on winning every swing state and being out there and not worrying about a bigger movement. That can come after she wins. But right now, head to the ground, just keep worrying about this campaign and nothing else.
Let me ask you, David, about what Donald Trump talks about a lot, which is the rising crime rates. He called DNC host city Chicago a war zone that is worse than Afghanistan. But here's the thing. FBI data shows a clear drop in violent crime since Trump left office. Does Harris need to strongly point out Trump's lies on crime and everything else? But if she does that, is she spending more time doing that than putting out her own proposals on policy?
Well, certainly the Harris campaign or surrogate needs to call out Donald Trump's lies, as the media does, like you just did. Donald Trump lies about everything. Crime is on the way down. The stock market's at an all-time high. More people will go to work tomorrow than ever before. Housing, access to housing and healthcare and education is as strong as it's ever been. So Donald Trump likes to badmouth America and likes to demean America. And that was part of the message of Vice President Harris and Governor Walz at the convention is the American people are sick and tired of Donald Trump waking up and rooting against America every day, particularly when he is lying, using lies to do that. That does build into this movement conversation a little bit. Part of what is lifting Harris right now is she did inherit, in part, a coalition that was being built by Joe Biden, but with her renewed leadership, her renewed energy, her vision, and her stamp on it, that's where we're seeing something that feels different than a political campaign that we've seen in a generation.